All right, welcome to part 1 of parenting. Most of the content for these next 2 chapters will be combined into a part 1 and part 2. So most of part 1 is coming from chapter 10, which is about parenting, and specifically we'll count the cost of parenting. By counting the cost, I mean not just the physical cost, but what does it require of people to become parents? Parents who are truly invested in the welfare of their children. So all of our lecture here and your discussion board content will center around this idea of what does it cost, not just to be a parent, but to be a good one. So of all the questions that you ask, this is not just one of them, but you could argue perhaps one of the most important. You have questions about where to work, where to live, when and how to date and marry, but questions about children are certainly very permanent. We are afforded here in this country with questions of whether we want children. And we have to realize that this is sort of a recent phenomenon. There's many different cultures that would not have seen such a question as a matter of choice. Okay, so essentially is having children a matter of want to, or is it sort of a foregone conclusion that we need kids? So all these are thoughts and questions that are perplexing us. Perhaps how many questions would you like to have? How many children would you like to have? How many years in between the children? And when will I be ready to have kids? So perhaps in counting the cost of having kids and being a good parent, you should ask, what is driving this motivation? What does it mean to be a good parent? How will I go about obtaining these children? Will I have the ability, wherewithal to support them? How will I parent these children? How will I maintain an involved, committed relationship to them? And how will I transition in and out of parenting? So at some point, right, you have to move your children into independence. And all of these questions are vital. And there is actually data to prove that people are asking these questions. There is a declining birth rate, so a ratio of live births per 1,000 people in the population is the definition of birth rate. So in 1909, the birth rate was 30%. In 2003, the birth rate was 13.9. That's the lowest ever, over a 50% drop. Women from 40 to 44 who were child-free also have increased. So before 1970, only 10%, and now after 1976, the last 40 years or so, this number is up above 20%. So this means that people are counting the cost of having children. They're having fewer children. A sociology professor of mine once said the most effective contraceptive has been women in the workplace. When you see women working, they have fewer children. And in industrial societies where women work, you see lower childbirth rates. People are counting the cost. They understand that is a tremendous responsibility. So you can see with this infograph here, there's a direct relationship between environmental, socio-historical events and the birth rate. You can see here a declining birth rate with the stock market and the Great Depression. When things are good financially, there's an increase. Then you see beginning of a decline with the Vietnam War. But what's interesting, as opposed to after the Great Depression, there was a rebound. There has not been a rebound in the U.S. So since 1953, 54, the decline began and it has continued. About the time I was getting married, the birth rate was at an all-time low. And so essentially what this tells us is that your environment, the economy, socio-historical events affect the birth rate. So how exactly does this happen? That socio-historical events affect the public opinion of child development or child rearing. In 1964, you see that children in the United States under age 18, in terms of the percentage of the population, made up 36%. In 2050, it is estimated that children will make up only 23% of the population. And there are a few groups who see exceptions to this declining child rate. So for instance, teenage girls, we see an increase from 1991 to 2006, and an increase in births to teenage girls. So you see 1991 to 2002, there was a decline, but we see an increase. So rates are climbing. We're also seeing highly educated women are also not declining in their birth rate. So if we see greater births to teen mothers, highly educated women, what that means is that the majority of women, we're seeing a decline. So this is what is contributing to the overall decline in the population of younger people. So where we see teen pregnancy, we see problems. Usually teen mothers are marginalized or from marginalized communities. High poverty rates, poor health habits, lower academic achievement of their kids. So the children of teen mothers have a lot of problems, poor academic success. Fewer of them make it to college. Many of them, you have a higher incidence of children of teen mothers going to prison, doing drugs, and then continuing the cycle. There's also a high rate of parental depression and anxiety. We're seeing more unmarried mothers. There's 28% of mothers in 1990 were unmarried, and 41% of mothers are unmarried in 2008. We see more foreign-born mothers. Native-born people in the U.S. has been declining over 40 years. In 2008, 20% of births were to foreign-born mothers. In 2050, estimates new immigrants and children and grandchildren born in the U.S. will account for 82% of the population increase. So the complexion of the United States is changing, and therefore we would expect to see greater social and cultural change. Carolyn and Philip Cowan have listed 4 reactions when a couple finds out they are expecting. So the planner partners say, we have a baby, this is great. Secondly, the acceptance of fate partners, what a pleasant surprise. Ambivalent partners, we really didn't want a baby, but we'll go ahead with it. And finally, yes-no partners, who would say, I want a baby, my spouse doesn't, but I'll have a child anyway. There are consequences to each of these parenting attitudes. So for instance, children who are the ambivalent or the products of the yes-no partners will oftentimes have problems associated and may feel as though their parents resented their birth. There's different attitudes towards children. So you have the child-free families. These are married couples who are voluntarily having no children, often referred to as the dinks. Dual income, no kids. Usually have higher incomes, more equitable gender roles. They enjoy travel and freedom. Oftentimes have demanding jobs, careers, and their motto is, we can have children or we can have everything else. They report enjoying fewer bills, less family work, conflict, less daily stressors, and may report a more satisfied relationship. But in times of stress, they may be more prone to divorce, and they contend with a pro-natalist bias. So what that means is there are large sections of the populace that are pro-childbirth. You might just react to this by asking yourself, if your mother or grandmother were to meet a woman who openly said she did not want to have kids, what would their attitude or their response be? It's interesting that I have met people such as this, and I've heard these responses, and there may be insinuations that they are less than a true woman or less maternal. And also I've known people who would say they did not want children, but this also might, underneath it may be some infertility. More on this later. And even more common than dinks are families who postpone parenthood. This is more popular than childhood families, child-free families. So first-time mothers are older than ever. 1970, the average mother was 21 years old. In 2008, the average mother is 25 for a first-time mother. The U.S. is a more adult-focused society. It's yet less child-friendly, so this leads to smaller families and lower birth rates. Most families are choosing to encourage their kids to complete their education and establish their careers. So there's a demand that children require, a cost, and this competes with jobs and fertility issues. And in many cases, after postponing the family planning or postponing the beginning of rearing children, you can risk birth defects. So you can see that women are waiting longer to have their first child. So the average age of mothers 15 to 44 years old giving birth to their first child is rising. So the average age of women having their first child was 21 years of age in 1970. Goes up to 22 in 1980. First child happens at age 24 on average in 1990. 2024, almost 25. And in 2008, the average age at which a woman has her first child was 25.1. So questions regarding how many children people are having come to light. Of couples who choose only one child, from 1970, this was only 9.6%, but it began climbing in frequency ever since. So in 2007, 20% of families only have one child. You guys might know the stereotype of the spoiled, selfish, lonely only child, but this is largely not true. When families choose 2 or more children, 17% have 2 and 9% have 3 or more. Now, reasons vary. Sometimes it's company for another child. Sometimes parents decide they would like another sex. So, like for instance, if you have 2 females, they desire a male child. This was actually what my parents told me. They were hoping for a male, which I don't know how that made my sisters feel. Every child added will change the dynamics of the family. Larger families emphasize greater cooperation over independence and sharing over personal development. In other sociology classes, we look at George Simmel's work on family dynamics, or specifically as adding one person to a group changes group dynamics. And Simmel's done some formative work in this. It's quite interesting. When you apply that to family life, just think of adding one more child. What would it have been like if you had another sibling? Chances are there would have been a greater diffusion of responsibility. And these are fascinating what ifs. I discussed pronatalism earlier. Pronatalism speaks to attitudes that encourage childbearing. These are social influences found among family, friends, religion, government, and perpetuate a positive attitude about children. And these are really multifaceted, and they reinforce a pro-child environment. So China's one-child policy was actually an attempt to dial back the pronatalism. This saw many Chinese families, specifically wealthy child families, even moving or traveling to America to have a child here, so the child would be a United States citizen. This was a way to avoid the one-child policy. So pronatalism is found in America when you see family members encouraging a couple to have children. It is quite prominent. However, if the child rate declines, then that's evidence that pronatalism is not as prominent as it used to be. So what are some individual motivations for having children? In some cases, there is a conscious individual motivation. People just desire the love and companionship of their own offspring. For me and my wife, it was a desire to leave a legacy, I believe. And for us, it was actually something that's not on here, which is a desire to adopt, to provide a home for those in need. Another common motivation would be number 2, the desire to be personally fulfilled. And having children would enable us to do this. When 125 people were surveyed who did not have children, and they were asked, what would make you decide to have children? 94% said finding the right partner to have children with would be a reason. 84% said the joy of having children. 77% would say they would need to have adequate resources. 67% would say that the spouse's wishes, and only 15% said to care for me when I'm old. 5% said pressure from the family would influence this. Our children can provide a great sense of fulfillment and companionship. Here's a picture of a father who was 58 when his daughter was born. celebrating her 20th birthday in this picture. He had another son when he was 62. So he's 78 when this picture was taken. Some general trends. Families are getting smaller, with most couples opting for 2 children. Hispanics have the largest families. Asians have the smallest. So Hispanics on average 2.24, African Americans 2.1, Caucasians 1.9, and Asians 1.74. So that means the average family would have 1 child, and then other families would have 2. That averages the 1.7. Women with higher education and income have the lowest fertility rates. Only high school and low income have the highest. So a middle income family with 2 kids can expect to spend 40 to 45% or more after taxes of their total income on their children. So nearly half of all a middle class family would make is going towards their child. Children born in 2010 of a middle income family will cost upwards of $230,000 before the age of 18. College expenses or birth expenses not included. So you're looking at a lot of money. Northeast is the most expensive place to raise a family, followed by the West and the Midwest, South being the least. So this infographic gives you some sense of how middle income families are spending their money. So families making between $45,000 and $80,000 annually, about $3,000 a month going towards a house, about $4,000 a month towards childcare, $1,500 a month towards groceries, about $1,300 towards a car, $600 to clothing, $600 education, $330 to gifts, $300 to miscellaneous, $300 to recreation, and $300 to insurance. It gives you some idea. So the bottom line is that kids are expensive, very expensive. So essentially, in the first part of this, we're talking about counting the cost. Hopefully you get some idea of this, and I'd like to hear your reaction about how to be invested, not just financially, but emotionally and psychologically. All right, thanks for your attention.